Welcome to a peaceful journey through time. As you settle in and relax, let me guide you through the remarkable story of the Phoenicians, a civilization whose influence shaped our world in ways we still experience today. When we think of ancient civilizations, the Greeks and Romans often come to mind first. And yes, they built magnificent temples, created enduring philosophies, and established vast empires. But there is another civilization, equally important, yet often overlooked. The Phoenicians were the invisible threads connecting the ancient world. While the Greeks gave us democracy and the Romans gave us law, the Phoenicians gave us something even more fundamental. They gave us the ability to communicate across cultures. They invented the alphabet that would become the ancestor of nearly every writing system in the Western world. They sailed beyond the known world when others feared the horizon. They built networks of trade that connected 3 continents, spreading not just goods, but ideas, technologies, and cultures. Without the Phoenicians, there might have been no Greek philosophy written down for posterity, no Roman legal codes, no transmission of knowledge across the Mediterranean world. They were the bridges, the connectors, the quiet revolutionaries of the ancient world. The Phoenicians emerged along a narrow strip of coastline in what we now call Lebanon, around 1500 BC. This was not a land of vast plains or mighty rivers like Egypt or Mesopotamia. The Phoenicians had something else. They had the sea. Behind them rose the Lebanon mountains, covered in dense forests of cedar trees. These magnificent cedars would become their gateway to greatness. The wood was strong, aromatic, and resistant to decay, perfect for building ships. And ships would be everything. The Phoenician homeland consisted of independent city-states, each one clinging to the Mediterranean coast. Sidon, Byblos, these names echo through history. Unlike other ancient empires that spread through military conquest, the Phoenicians expanded through something quieter: trade. They were merchants and sailors first, warriors only when necessary. This distinction is important because it shaped everything about who they were. Around 1200 BCE, something catastrophic happened across the eastern Mediterranean. Historians call it the Bronze Age collapse. Great empires fell, cities burned, and trade routes crumbled. The Mycenaean Greeks, the Hittites, and many others vanished or were severely weakened. But the Phoenicians adapted. They sailed into this power vacuum and became the new masters of Mediterranean trade. Where others saw chaos and danger, the Phoenicians saw opportunity. The city of Byblos, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world, had a special relationship with Egypt that stretched back over 1,000 years. The Egyptians desperately needed cedar wood for their temples, their ships, and the coffins of their pharaohs. Byblos supplied this precious resource, and in return, Egyptian papyrus flowed into Phoenician ports. In fact, the Greek word for book, Biblion, comes from Byblos. Even the word Bible traces its roots to this ancient Phoenician city, a testament to their role in spreading written knowledge. But what truly made the Phoenicians special was their fearlessness on the open sea. Around 1000 BCE, when most ancient peoples rarely ventured beyond sight of land, Phoenician sailors were crossing the Mediterranean with confidence. They used the North Star for navigation at night, a technique they may have been the first to master. They learned to read the winds, the currents, the color of the water. The sea was not their enemy. It was their highway, their empire without borders. Their ships were marvels of ancient engineering. The Phoenicians built 2 main types of vessels. The first were heavy, broad merchant ships with rounded hulls, designed to carry maximum cargo. These ships could hold hundreds of amphorae, clay vessels filled with wine, olive oil, and their most precious commodity, Tyrian purple dye. The second type were sleek warships called biremes, with 2 rows of oars and a deadly ram at the front. These ships protected the merchant vessels and projected Phoenician power when necessary. The Phoenician alphabet emerged around 1050 BC, and this may be their greatest gift to humanity. Before this, writing systems were complicated, requiring hundreds or even thousands of symbols. Egyptian hieroglyphs, Mesopotamian cuneiform, these took years to master. But the Phoenicians created something revolutionary, a system of just 22 letters, each representing a single sound. It was simple, efficient, and easy to learn. This wasn't just a new way of writing, it was a democratization of literacy. Suddenly, merchants, sailors, and common people could keep records and communicate. The Greeks adopted this alphabet, added vowels, and passed it to the Romans. The Romans spread it across Europe. And now, you're reading words on a screen using letters that descended from those 22 Phoenician symbols invented over 3,000 years ago. In the city of Tyre, something extraordinary was being produced, a purple dye so rare and precious that it became worth more than gold. This was Tyrian purple, extracted from the glands of Murex sea snails. It took tens of thousands of these tiny creatures to produce just 1 gram of dye. The process was labor-intensive and the smell was absolutely terrible, but the result was a color unlike anything else in the ancient world. Deep, vibrant, and remarkably resistant to fading. This purple became the color of royalty and power. Roman emperors wore togas trimmed with Tyrian purple. The phrase, born to the purple, meaning born into royalty, comes from this Phoenician creation. Even the name, Phoenician, itself likely comes from the Greek word, phoenix, meaning purple people. The Phoenicians had a remarkable relationship with glass. Around 1500 BCE, glassmaking was already known in the ancient world, but the Phoenicians transformed it into an art form. According to the Roman historian Pliny, Phoenician merchants camping on a beach discovered glass by accident. They placed their cooking pots on blocks of natron, a type of mineral salt they were transporting, and the heat of their fire combined the natron with the beach sand, creating glass. Whether this story is true or legend, we may never know, but what we do know is that Phoenician artisans became masters of glasswork. They created translucent vessels, colorful beads, and intricate ornaments. Their glass beads traveled as far as Britain and sub-Saharan Africa, tiny, beautiful ambassadors of Phoenician craftsmanship. The city of Sidon became famous throughout the ancient world for another reason: its skilled metalworkers. Phoenician craftsmen worked with gold, silver, bronze, and iron, creating objects of stunning beauty and precision. They didn't just make jewelry and decorative items, they created functional art. Bronze bowls with intricate engravings, silver cups with delicate designs, golden ornaments that caught the light in mesmerizing ways. These objects were so prized that they've been found in tombs and treasures from Cyprus to Italy, from Greece to Mesopotamia. Kings and nobles across the ancient world desired Phoenician craftsmanship. Now, let us talk about something truly revolutionary: the Phoenician approach to navigation and exploration. While many ancient peoples believed the world ended at the Strait of Gibraltar, what they called the Pillars of Hercules, the Phoenicians sailed beyond. They established colonies along the North African coast, creating a network of trading posts and settlements. The most famous of these was Carthage, founded around 814 BCE near modern-day Tunis. Carthage would eventually become a great power in its own right, but it began as a Phoenician colony, a safe harbor, a place where ships could resupply and trade goods flowing from deep within Africa. The Phoenicians developed sophisticated shipbuilding techniques that other cultures would later adopt. They understood that different types of wood had different properties. Cedar from Lebanon for the frame and keel, providing strength and resistance to decay. Pine for the masts, lighter yet tall and straight. They waterproofed their ships using a combination of pitch and wax, making vessels that could withstand months at sea. They even developed a type of underwater ram covered in bronze, which protected the front of their warships. Every detail was considered, every innovation served a purpose. Trade was the lifeblood of Phoenician society, and they dealt in an astonishing variety of goods. From their own lands, they exported cedar wood, wine, and olive oil. From Egypt, they acquired papyrus and linen. From Cyprus came copper. From Arabia, spices and incense. From Africa, ivory and exotic animals. From Spain, silver and tin. The Phoenicians were the intermediaries, the connectors, bringing together products and peoples who would never otherwise meet. In their marketplaces, you might hear a dozen different languages, see merchants from as many lands, and witness the exchange of goods from 3 continents. The Phoenicians had a deep spiritual life, though much of it remains mysterious to us. They worshipped a pantheon of gods connected to the sea, the sky, and fertility. Baal, whose name simply means Lord, was associated with storms and rain, essential for sailors and farmers alike. Astarte was a goddess of love and fertility, her temples found throughout the Phoenician world. The Phoenicians built their temples on high places, often on islands or promontories overlooking the sea. They made offerings of incense, wine, and precious objects. Their religion was deeply woven into their maritime identity. They asked the gods for safe voyages, favorable winds, and protection from storms. Let us speak now of their colonies, not as conquered territories, but as extensions of home. When Phoenician traders found a good harbor, a source of valuable resources, or a strategic location, they would establish a settlement. These weren't military outposts, they were communities. Families would sail from Tyre or Sidon to start new lives in distant lands. They brought their language, their customs, their gods, and their skills. In southern Spain, they founded Gadir, modern Cadiz, around 1100 BCE, making it one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in Western Europe. In Sicily, Malta, Sardinia, throughout the Mediterranean islands, Phoenician colonies appeared like pearls on a necklace, each one connected to the others through ships and trade. The Phoenicians were also remarkable astronomers. Sailing at night required understanding the stars, and Phoenician sailors became experts in celestial navigation. They identified constellations and understood the movement of stars across the seasons. Greek writers later credited the Phoenicians with teaching them about the constellation Ursa Minor, the Little Bear, and its use in navigation. The North Star, part of this constellation, became the Phoenician sailors' most trusted guide. On cloudy nights, they could navigate by reading the swells and waves, a skill passed down through generations of seafarers. The cosmopolitan nature of Phoenician cities created something unique in the ancient world, a blending of cultures and ideas. In ports like Tyre and Byblos, Egyptian merchants lived alongside Greeks, Cypriots traded with Anatolians, and African goods mixed with European products. This constant cultural exchange meant that Phoenician artisans absorbed influences from everywhere. You can see it in their art, Egyptian motifs combined with Mesopotamian styles. Greek forms blended with local traditions. They were cultural translators, taking ideas from one civilization and introducing them to another. In this way, they didn't just transport goods, they transported knowledge, artistic styles, religious concepts, and technological innovations. The Phoenicians were master farmers and vintners, despite their limited agricultural land. The narrow coastal strip between the mountains and the sea seemed an unlikely place for agriculture, but the Phoenicians were ingenious. They built terraces on the hillsides, creating level platforms where they could plant olive groves and vineyards. The limestone soil and Mediterranean climate were perfect for these crops. Phoenician wine became famous throughout the ancient world, transported in distinctive amphorae, tall clay vessels with two handles and a pointed bottom. These amphorae were designed to be stacked efficiently in ships' holds, and they've been found in shipwrecks from one end of the Mediterranean to the other. Each region produced wine with its own character, and merchants could identify the origin by the shape and style of the amphora. Now let us consider something often overlooked: the Phoenician love of gardens and beautiful spaces. In their cities, wealthy merchants created rooftop gardens and courtyards filled with plants. They imported exotic flowers and trees from their trading voyages, creating small paradises in the midst of bustling port cities. Archaeological evidence shows elaborate garden designs with fountains, pools, and shaded walkways. These weren't just decorative, they were sanctuaries of peace, places to escape the noise of commerce and the smell of the dye works. The Phoenicians understood the importance of beauty and tranquility in daily life. The relationship between Phoenicia and the Kingdom of Israel was particularly close and fascinating. Around 1000 BCE, King Hiram of Tyre and King Solomon of Israel formed a partnership. Hiram supplied cedar wood and skilled craftsmen for Solomon's great temple in Jerusalem. In return, Solomon provided wheat and olive oil. The Bible describes how Hiram's master craftsmen worked alongside Israelite builders, sharing their expertise in stonework and metalwork. This wasn't just a commercial arrangement, it was a cultural exchange that lasted generations. Phoenician architects influenced the design of Solomon's temple, and this collaboration showed how the Phoenicians built relationships through mutual benefit rather than dominance. Let us speak of the Phoenician contribution to mathematics and commerce. They developed sophisticated accounting systems to track their complex trade networks. They used a decimal system for counting and had standardized weights and measures. Phoenician merchants needed to calculate exchange rates between different currencies, measure cargo capacities, and keep detailed records of transactions across vast distances. They created some of the earliest forms of commercial contracts, agreements written on papyrus or clay tablets that specified terms of trade, delivery dates, and quality standards. These practices laid groundwork for modern business practices, the idea that trade should be based on clear agreements and mutual trust. The Phoenicians were also skilled in the art of ivory carving. Ivory, imported from Africa and Syria, was carved into intricate panels used to decorate furniture, jewelry boxes, and ceremonial objects. Phoenician ivory workers created pieces showing incredible detail, images of animals, mythological scenes, and geometric patterns. These ivories often combined Egyptian, Assyrian, and local styles, creating something uniquely Phoenician. Panels of Phoenician ivory have been discovered in palaces from Mesopotamia to Spain, testament to how widely their artworks traveled. Each piece took countless hours of careful work, a meditation in patience and skill. Now, Imagine the daily life in a Phoenician port city. Morning would begin with fishermen returning with their catch, the markets filling with fresh fish, octopus, and shellfish. Merchants would open their shops, displaying textiles from Egypt, pottery from Greece, spices from Arabia. The air would smell of salt water, cedar wood, fish, and incense. Children might play near the harbor, watching the ships being loaded and unloaded. Craftsmen in their workshops, the glassmaker heating his furnace, the metalsmith hammering bronze, the weaver working her loom. Women managing households, preparing meals of bread, olive oil, fish, and wine. Life revolved around the rhythm of the sea, the coming and going of ships, the exchange of goods and stories from distant lands. The Phoenicians developed advanced textile production beyond just purple dye. They wove linen into fine fabrics and created woolen garments of excellent quality. They mastered the art of dyeing in multiple colors, reds from madder root, blues from indigo, yellows from saffron. But their expertise went further. They learned to create fabrics with intricate patterns, using techniques that required exceptional skill. Some Phoenician textiles were so fine and valuable that they were given as royal gifts. Egyptian pharaohs treasured Phoenician cloth. Greek nobles wore garments of Phoenician linen. The city of Tyre became particularly famous for a type of fine linen that was almost translucent, prized for its delicacy and beauty. Let us consider the Phoenician contribution to music and musical instruments. Archaeological evidence and ancient texts tell us that the Phoenicians were accomplished musicians. They played lyres, flutes, drums, and cymbals. Music accompanied religious ceremonies, celebrations, and daily life. Some scholars believe the Phoenicians may have influenced Greek music theory, just as they influenced so many other aspects of Greek culture. In the temples, priests and priestesses would perform musical offerings to the gods. On ships, sailors sang work songs to coordinate their rowing. In homes, families might gather in the evening to play music and tell stories. Music was woven into the fabric of Phoenician life, another form of beauty they brought into the world. The Phoenicians had a remarkable understanding of the tides and currents of the Mediterranean. They knew that certain winds blew at certain seasons, the Etesian winds from the north in summer, for example. They understood how currents flowed along coastlines and between islands. This knowledge was passed down orally from master sailors to apprentices, a living library of maritime wisdom. They could predict weather patterns by observing clouds, the behavior of birds, and the color of the sea. They knew which harbors offered the best protection in different conditions. This deep relationship with the sea went beyond practical knowledge. It was almost spiritual, a profound respect for the water that was both their livelihood and their highway to the world. Finally, let us speak of the Phoenician concept of networks and connections. Unlike empires that ruled through military force and rigid hierarchies, the Phoenician world was a network of cities, colonies, and trading posts linked by ships and family relationships. A merchant family in Tyre might have cousins managing a trading post in Carthage, brothers running a warehouse in Cyprus, and partners in Sicily. These personal connections created a web of trust and cooperation that spanned the Mediterranean. Information traveled along these networks, news of profitable markets, warnings of pirates, knowledge of new technologies. The Phoenicians understood something that would only be rediscovered much later, that networks built on mutual benefit and trust can be more resilient and adaptable than rigid empires. Let us journey onward through the gentle currents of Phoenician history, discovering more about how these people lived, created, and shaped the world around them. The Phoenicians had a sophisticated understanding of preservation and food storage. Living by the sea and engaged in long-distance trade, they needed ways to keep food fresh for extended voyages. They became masters of salting and drying fish, creating products that could last for months. They preserved olives in brine, stored grain in sealed clay jars, and dried fruits in the Mediterranean sun. Wine and olive oil, stored in those distinctive amphorae, could survive journeys of many weeks. They also developed early forms of pickling, using vinegar and salt to preserve vegetables. These techniques weren't just practical, they were essential to their way of life. A ship departing from Tyre might carry enough preserved food to sustain its crew for months at sea, enabling those long voyages of exploration and trade. Now, let us consider the role of women in Phoenician society. While much of ancient history focuses on men, evidence suggests that Phoenician women had more autonomy than in many contemporary cultures. Women could own property, engage in business, and inherit wealth. In the bustling marketplaces, women ran shops and managed trades. Some women became skilled artisans, weavers, potters, and jewelry makers. In religious life, priestesses served in the temples, performing important rituals and maintaining sacred spaces. The goddess Astarte, one of the most important deities, represented the power and importance of the feminine. This respect for women's roles created a more balanced society, where talents and contributions were valued regardless of gender. The Phoenicians developed remarkable techniques in pottery making. Their potters created vessels of all sizes and purposes, from tiny perfume bottles to enormous storage jars that could hold hundreds of liters. They developed a potter's wheel that spun smoothly and quickly, allowing them to create perfectly symmetrical vessels. The clay was often mixed with crushed shells or sand to make it stronger. Once shaped, the pottery would be dried in the sun, then fired in kilns that could reach very high temperatures. Some Phoenician pottery was left in its natural terracotta color, warm and earthy. Other pieces were painted with geometric designs, images of animals, or scenes from daily life. Each pot tells a story of the hands that shaped it, the fire that hardened it, and the journeys it would take. Let us speak now of Phoenician contributions to agriculture beyond their famous wines and olives. They cultivated pomegranates, figs, and dates, fruits that thrived in the Mediterranean climate. The pomegranate, with its jewel-like seeds, was considered sacred in many ancient cultures, and the Phoenicians traded these fruits throughout their network. They also grew herbs, rosemary, thyme, oregano, both for cooking and for medicinal purposes. These herbs were dried and bundled, then traded alongside other goods. The Phoenicians understood crop rotation, allowing fields to rest and recover their nutrients. They collected rainwater in cisterns carved into rock, ensuring water supply during dry months. Every technique reflected their deep understanding of the land and seasons. The concept of hospitality was central to Phoenician culture. When a foreign merchant arrived at a Phoenician port, there were established customs of welcome. The visitor would be offered food, drink, and a place to rest. Business would wait until these courtesies were observed. This wasn't just politeness, it was essential to building the trust that made long-distance trade possible. A merchant from Greece arriving in Sidon, or an Egyptian trader visiting Byblos, knew they would be treated with respect and fairness. These relationships often lasted generations, families trading with the same partners across decades. Trust was more valuable than gold, and hospitality was how that trust was built and maintained. The Phoenicians created beautiful mosaics, using tiny pieces of colored stone, glass, and ceramic to create images and patterns. These mosaics decorated the floors of wealthy homes and public buildings. The artisans would first create the design on paper or sketch it directly onto the surface. Then, painstakingly, they would place each tiny piece, tessera by tessera, building up the image like a puzzle. The finished mosaics showed scenes of marine life, dolphins and fish swimming in azure waters, or geometric patterns that seemed to shift and move as you walked across them. Some depicted mythological scenes or images from nature. Creating a single mosaic could take months or even years, a testament to patience and dedication to beauty. Now let us explore Phoenician contributions to perfumery and cosmetics. They imported frankincense and myrrh from Arabia, resins that when burned produced fragrant smoke used in religious ceremonies and for pleasure. They created perfumes by steeping flowers, herbs, and spices in oil, rose petals, jasmine, cinnamon, and cedar. These perfumed oils were stored in small, elegant glass bottles that themselves were works of art. Wealthy Phoenicians used cosmetics, kohl to line the eyes, rouge made from crushed minerals for the cheeks and lips, henna to decorate hands and dye hair. These weren't vanities, they were expressions of personal care and cultural identity. The perfumes and cosmetics created in Phoenician cities were traded throughout the Mediterranean, bringing the sense of distant gardens to faraway lands. The Phoenicians understood the importance of education and the transmission of knowledge. Though we have few Phoenician texts surviving, their perishable papyrus documents lost to time, we know that literacy was valued and relatively widespread. Merchants needed to read and write to keep records. Scribes worked in temples and palaces, recording transactions, treaties, and religious texts. Children of merchant families learned reading, writing, and mathematics, essential skills for their future roles in trade. The simplicity of the Phoenician alphabet made this education more accessible than in cultures with complex writing systems. Knowledge flowed through Phoenician society like water, practical, essential, and available to those who sought it. Let us consider the Phoenician relationship with horses and other animals. While they're remembered primarily as sailors, Phoenicians also kept livestock and working animals. Horses were particularly valued, both for transportation and as symbols of status. Archaeological sites have revealed stables and evidence of horse breeding. Donkeys and mules served as pack animals, carrying goods through the mountains and between cities. Sheep and goats provided wool, milk, and meat. Dogs served as companions and guards. Cats, perhaps introduced from Egypt, helped control rodents in grain stores and homes. Phoenicians treated their animals with care, understanding that the well-being of their animals directly affected their own prosperity. Finally, let us reflect on the Phoenician understanding of time and seasons. Their calendar was lunar-based, with months following the cycles of the moon. But they also observed solar patterns, knowing when to plant and harvest, when to sail and when to stay in port. Religious festivals marked the turning of the seasons, celebrations of spring's renewal, summer's abundance, autumn's harvest, and winter's rest. The Phoenicians lived in harmony with these natural rhythms. They understood that there was a time for action and a time for patience, a time to sail the seas and a time to maintain the ships, a time to trade and a time to celebrate. This cyclical view of time created a society that was both dynamic and sustainable, always moving forward while respecting the patterns of nature. The Phoenicians developed sophisticated methods of beekeeping and honey production. In a time before refined sugar, honey was the primary sweetener, and it held great value. Phoenician beekeepers used clay hives, cylindrical tubes stacked horizontally, where bees would build their combs. These hives were often placed in gardens and orchards, where flowering plants provided nectar. The honey was harvested carefully, leaving enough for the bees to survive. Phoenician honey was flavored by the plants the bees visited: thyme honey from the hillsides, orange blossom honey from the groves, wildflower honey from the meadows. This golden substance was used in cooking, in making sweet pastries, as a preservative, and in medicine. Beeswax, too, was valuable, used for candles, for sealing wine amphorae, and in cosmetics. The relationship between the Phoenicians and their bees was one of mutual benefit. The bees pollinated the crops, and the people provided safe homes for the hives. Now, let us speak of Phoenician contributions to urban planning and architecture. Their cities were marvels of organization. Streets were laid out in grids, making navigation easier and creating efficient flow of people and goods. They built multi-story buildings, maximizing the limited coastal space. The lower floors housed shops and workshops, while families lived in the upper levels. Buildings were constructed from limestone blocks, fitted together with remarkable precision. They created drainage systems to channel rainwater and waste away from living areas, an advanced understanding of public health for their time. Public wells and fountains provided fresh water, often decorated with carved stone and bronze fixtures. Marketplaces were strategically located near the harbors, allowing goods to move quickly from ships to buyers. The Phoenician city was designed for commerce, for community, for comfortable living. The art of seal-making was highly developed among the Phoenicians. These small carved objects, made from stone, glass, or metal, served as personal signatures. A merchant would press his seal into soft clay or wax to mark his goods, authenticate documents, or sign contracts. Each seal was unique, often featuring the owner's name in Phoenician letters along with an image, perhaps a ship, a scarab beetle, a palm tree, or a deity. The carving of these tiny objects required extraordinary skill and precision. A seal maker would work with magnifying lenses made from water-filled glass spheres, carefully incising the hard stone with bronze tools and abrasive powders. These seals have survived for thousands of years, each one a miniature work of art, a connection to an individual person who lived and worked in the ancient Phoenician world. Let us consider the Phoenician approach to medicine and healing. They gathered medicinal plants from the hills and mountains, herbs like sage, mint, and chamomile. They understood which plants could soothe fevers, ease digestion, or heal wounds. Honey was used as an antibacterial dressing for cuts and burns. Olive oil served as a base for medicinal ointments. They imported exotic ingredients through their trade networks: myrrh for its antiseptic properties, aloe for treating skin conditions, cinnamon for digestive ailments. Phoenician healers combined practical knowledge passed down through generations with ingredients from across the known world. They set broken bones, stitched wounds, and prepared remedies for common illnesses. While their understanding was limited by the knowledge of their time, their empirical approach, observing what worked and what didn't, laid foundations for later medical practices. The Phoenicians created beautiful works in bronze, statues, vessels, and decorative objects that demonstrated their metallurgical expertise. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, required precise knowledge of proportions and temperatures. Phoenician bronze workers developed the lost wax casting method to an art form. They would first create a detailed model in wax, cover it in clay, then heat it until the wax melted away, leaving a perfect mold. Molten bronze would be poured into this mold, creating intricate shapes that would be impossible to carve from solid metal. The finished pieces, bronze bowls with elaborate handles shaped like animals, statues of deities with flowing robes, incense burners decorated with mythical creatures, showed incredible attention to detail. Each piece represented hours of patient work, from the initial design to the final polishing that made the bronze gleam like gold. Now let us explore the Phoenician understanding of stone carving and masonry. They quarried limestone from the mountains behind their cities, cutting massive blocks with bronze saws and wooden wedges. Water was poured into holes drilled in the stone, and wooden wedges were inserted. As the wood absorbed water and expanded, it would split the stone along natural fault lines. These blocks were then shaped and smoothed, sometimes so precisely that mortar wasn't needed, the blocks held together by their own weight and perfect fit. Phoenician stonemasons created harbor walls that could withstand the pounding of waves, temple foundations that have lasted millennia, and sarcophagi decorated with intricate carvings. They understood stone, its grain, its strength, its beauty. They could look at a raw block and envision the finished work within it. The Phoenicians had deep knowledge of the stars and constellations beyond just navigation. They observed the night sky with wonder and mapped the patterns they saw. They noticed that certain stars rose and set at the same time each year, marking the seasons. They told stories about the constellations, connecting the dots of light into images of gods, heroes, and animals. These stories were passed down through generations, along with the practical knowledge of how to use the stars for navigation. On clear nights, far from shore, Phoenician sailors would lie on deck and contemplate the vast dome of stars above them, feeling small beneath the cosmos yet connected to something eternal. This blend of practical astronomy and spiritual wonder characterized their relationship with the heavens. Let us speak now of Phoenician contributions to the cultivation and processing of flax. Flax plants, with their delicate blue flowers, were grown in fields near the cities. The plants were harvested, then soaked in water for weeks, a process called retting that separated the fibers from the woody stems. The fibers were then beaten, combed, and spun into thread. This linen thread was woven into fabric on looms, the warp and weft creating cloth of varying fineness. The finest Phoenician linen was almost translucent, used for the garments of the wealthy and for burial shrouds. Coarser linen served for everyday clothing, sails, and rope. The entire process, from planting the tiny flax seeds to wearing the finished garment, could take a year or more. Every step required knowledge, patience, and skill, another example of Phoenician mastery of craft. The Phoenicians created beautiful jewelry that combined precious metals with semi-precious stones. Goldsmiths worked with incredible precision, creating delicate filigree, thin wires of gold twisted and soldered into intricate patterns. They made granulation, tiny spheres of gold arranged to create texture and design. They set carnelian, lapis lazuli, and agate into rings, necklaces, and earrings. Some pieces incorporated glass beads of their own making, adding brilliant colors. The designs often showed Egyptian and Mesopotamian influences, but transformed into something distinctly Phoenician. A necklace might combine Egyptian scarab amulets with Phoenician glass beads and gold work, a physical representation of their role as cultural intermediaries. These jewels weren't just adornments, they were expressions of identity, status, and connection to the divine. Finally, let us reflect on the Phoenician relationship with sacred spaces and nature. While they built temples in their cities, they also recognized certain natural places as holy. Mountaintops, springs, and groves of ancient trees were considered sacred. They would make pilgrimages to these places, leaving offerings and seeking connection with the divine. A spring that had flowed for countless generations might be seen as the dwelling place of a water spirit. A grove of old cedar trees could be a temple without walls. This reverence for nature wasn't separate from their practical use of resources, it was intertwined with it. They harvested cedar, yes, but they also honored the majesty of these trees. They fished the sea, but they also respected its power and mystery. This balance, this understanding that the natural world was both a resource and a sacred gift, shaped their entire worldview. The Phoenicians were skilled in the art of rope-making, an essential craft for a seafaring people. They processed fibers from various plants, hemp, flax, and esparto grass, twisting and braiding them into cords of different thicknesses. The thinnest threads became fishing lines and sewing thread. Medium ropes served countless purposes on ships and in workshops. The thickest cables, as wide as a person's arm, were used as anchor ropes and mooring lines, capable of holding a ship steady against strong currents and winds. The rope makers worked in long buildings called rope walks, where they could lay out the full length of a rope as they twisted the fibers together. The rhythm of their work was almost meditative, the steady turning, the gradual building of something strong from many small strands. A well-made rope could last for years, and sailors trusted their lives to the quality of the rope maker's craft. Now let us consider the Phoenician practice of water management in their homes and cities. They carved cisterns deep into the limestone bedrock beneath their cities, creating underground reservoirs that collected and stored rainwater. These cisterns were lined with waterproof plaster to prevent seepage. From the cisterns, channels and clay pipes distributed water to public fountains and wealthy homes. Some homes had their own private cisterns beneath the courtyard. The Phoenicians understood the preciousness of fresh water in the Mediterranean climate, where summer could bring months without rain. They captured every drop from winter storms, ensuring supply through the dry season. In their bathhouses, they created heating systems where fire warmed water in bronze vessels, and steam could be directed through the rooms. This attention to water, its collection, distribution, and use, showed a sophisticated understanding of engineering and resource management. The art of basket weaving was practiced throughout Phoenician society. Using reeds, palm fronds, and flexible willow branches, weavers created containers for every purpose. Large baskets carried grain and produce from the countryside to the markets. Smaller baskets held bread, fish, or personal belongings. Fine baskets with tight weaves could hold liquids, lined with pitch or wax. The weavers would sit in the shade, their fingers moving with practiced speed, over and under, creating spiral patterns or geometric designs. Some baskets were left natural, showing the golden color of dried reeds. Others were dyed with plant colors, reds, browns, and blacks, creating striped patterns. A skilled weaver could make a basket that would last for years, and the craft was passed from parent to child, each generation adding its own refinements to ancient techniques. Let us speak now of Phoenician musical traditions in their homes and gathering places. Families would gather in the evening, when the day's work was done, to share music and stories. The lyre, with its wooden frame and strings of sheep gut or linen, produced gentle, resonant tones. Players would pluck or strum, creating melodies that had been passed down through generations. Flutes made from reed or bone added their voice, sweet and clear. Hand drums kept rhythm, their patterns mimicking the sound of waves or heartbeats. Children learned songs from their parents and grandparents, songs about the sea, about the changing seasons, about ancient stories of gods and heroes. This musical tradition created continuity across time, linking each generation to those who came before. The melodies, though lost to us now, once filled Phoenician homes with beauty and connection. The Phoenicians developed sophisticated fish preservation techniques beyond simple salting. They created a fermented fish sauce, similar to what the Romans would later call garum, by layering fish with salt and herbs in large ceramic vessels and allowing them to ferment in the sun for weeks or months. The resulting liquid was strained and used as a flavoring, salty, rich, and complex. This sauce became a valuable trade item, exported throughout the Mediterranean. They also smoked fish, hanging them in special houses where aromatic wood, often cedar, created a fragrant smoke that both preserved and flavored the fish. These preserved foods allowed protein to be stored and transported, feeding sailors on long voyages and providing sustenance during winter months when fresh fish was scarce. Now let us explore the Phoenician understanding of natural dyes beyond the famous purple. From the madder plant's roots, they extracted red dye. Indigo plants provided deep blue. Saffron crocus flowers, laboriously harvested, yielded brilliant yellow. Pomegranate rinds created soft yellows and golds. Walnut husks produced rich browns. Each dye required different preparation methods. Some roots needed to be dried and ground, some plants had to be fermented, some required the addition of minerals to fix the color. The dyers were chemists of their time, understanding through observation and experimentation how to coax color from nature. They knew which mordants, substances like alum or iron salts, would make colors brighter or darker, help them adhere to fabric, or make them resistant to fading. A master dyer's knowledge represented years of learning and countless experiments. The Phoenicians created beautiful oil lamps that illuminated their homes and public spaces. These lamps were crafted from clay, shaped on the potter's wheel or pressed in molds. The basic design was simple, a small bowl to hold olive oil, with a spout where a wick of twisted fiber would draw up the oil and burn with a steady flame. But Phoenician potters transformed this functional object into art. They decorated lamps with images, ships, dolphins, flowers, geometric patterns. Some lamps were shaped like shells or animals. The best lamps burned cleanly and brightly, with wicks that didn't smoke excessively. Families would light their lamps at sunset, the warm glow pushing back the darkness, creating intimate spaces where people could continue their activities, weaving, conversation, storytelling into the evening hours. Let us consider the Phoenician cultivation of date palms, particularly in their southern territories and trading colonies. Date palms were remarkable trees. They provided shade in their courtyards, their fronds could be woven into baskets and roof coverings, and most importantly, they produced sweet, nutritious fruit. A mature date palm could produce hundreds of pounds of dates each year. The Phoenicians understood that date palms required patience. A tree might take 7 to 10 years to begin bearing fruit, but then it would produce for a century or more. They learned techniques of pollination, climbing the tall trunks to bring pollen from male trees to fertilize the female flowers. Fresh dates were eaten as sweet treats. Dried dates could be stored for months, providing sustenance on sea voyages and a valuable trade commodity. Date honey, made by boiling dates until they formed a thick syrup, served as another precious sweetener. The Phoenicians practiced sophisticated leather working. Animal hides, from cattle, goats, and sheep, were transformed through a careful process. First, the hides were cleaned and the hair removed using lime solutions. Then they were tanned using natural tannins from oak bark, sumac, or other plants. This process could take weeks or even months, as the hides slowly absorbed the tanning agents. The finished leather was then worked, softened by manipulation, sometimes smoked for color and preservation, cut and sewn into useful items. Phoenician leather workers created sandals that could withstand rough roads and ship decks, bags and pouches for carrying goods, water skins for storing liquids, and harnesses for their animals. The finest leather was dyed and tooled with decorative patterns, creating luxury goods for wealthy clients. Finally, let us reflect on the Phoenician tradition of hospitality markers and way stations. Along trade routes, both on land and along the coast, they established places where travelers could find shelter, fresh water, and safety. These weren't grand structures, often just simple stone buildings with a cistern, perhaps a small garden. But they represented something important, the understanding that facilitating safe travel benefited everyone. A merchant traveling from Tyre to one of the inland cities could stop at these way stations, rest in the shade, water his animals, perhaps meet other travelers and exchange news. These places were marked with carved stones, showing travelers they had reached a safe haven. This network of hospitality extended the Phoenician sense of community beyond their cities, creating threads of safety and welcome across the landscape. The Phoenicians developed a deep understanding of lunar cycles and their relationship to the sea. They observed how the moon's phases affected the tides, how the highest tides came during the full moon and new moon, when the sun and moon aligned their gravitational pull. This knowledge was essential for sailors and fishermen. They knew when harbors would have enough water depth for larger ships, when rocky passages would be navigable, when beaches would be exposed for collecting shellfish. Fishermen learned which lunar phases brought different fish closer to shore. This wasn't written in books, it was knowledge carried in the minds and hearts of those who lived by the sea, passed down through careful observation and patient teaching. The moon was more than a light in the night sky. It was a guide, a timekeeper, a partner in the rhythm of maritime life. Now let us speak of the Phoenician practice of terracing and soil conservation on their hillsides. The land between the mountains and the sea was precious and limited. To make the most of it, they built stone walls across the slopes, creating level terraces like giant steps up the hillside. Each terrace caught and held soil that would otherwise wash away in winter rains. They filled these terraces with earth, sometimes carried up from the valleys below in baskets. In these carefully constructed plots, they planted olive trees, grapevines, and fig trees. The stone walls also absorbed heat during the day and released it at night, creating microclimates that extended the growing season. This labor-intensive approach to agriculture showed remarkable foresight. They were investing in land that would feed their descendants for generations. The ancient terraces they built can still be seen today in Lebanon, some still supporting olive groves after 3,000 years. The art of creating decorative tiles and architectural ceramics flourished in Phoenician cities. Artisans created glazed tiles with brilliant colors, turquoise blues, deep greens, rich reds. These tiles decorated the walls of temples and the homes of the wealthy, bringing color and light into interior spaces. They also created decorative roof tiles shaped like palm fronds or adorned with painted patterns. The glazes were made from minerals, copper for blues and greens, iron for reds and yellows. The tiles were fired multiple times, first to harden the clay, then to melt and fuse the glaze. When sunlight struck these glazed surfaces, they seemed to glow from within. This wasn't merely decoration, it was an expression of joy, a celebration of color and beauty in daily life. Let us consider the Phoenician tradition of narrative embroidery and textile art. While they're famous for purple dye, they also created textiles decorated with intricate embroidered designs. Using threads dyed in many colors, skilled embroiderers created images on cloth, ships sailing across waves, gardens filled with flowers, geometric patterns that seemed to shift and move. This work required exceptional eyesight and patience, each tiny stitch contributing to the larger design. Mothers taught daughters these techniques, and the patterns carried cultural meaning. Some designs were considered protective, others celebrated important life events. A bride might receive an embroidered cloth showing scenes of abundance and fertility. These textiles were treasured possessions, passed down through families, carrying stories and memories in their threads. The Phoenicians understood the properties of different woods beyond cedar. They used pine for ship masts because it grew tall and straight. Oak, dense and strong, served for tool handles and furniture that needed to bear weight. Olive wood, with its beautiful grain and natural oils, was carved into bowls, spoons, and decorative objects that wouldn't crack or absorb odors. Cypress, resistant to decay, lined storage chests and protected precious contents from moisture and insects. Tamarisk, flexible yet strong, was shaped into baskets and light frameworks. Each type of wood had its purpose, and Phoenician craftsmen knew them all intimately. They could identify wood by its scent, its weight, the way it split or curved. This knowledge came from years of working with their hands, feeling the character of each piece, understanding the gifts that different trees offered. Now let us explore the Phoenician practice of creating communal ovens in their neighborhoods. While wealthy homes might have private ovens, most people in the city relied on shared baking facilities. These communal ovens were dome-shaped structures built from stone and clay, capable of reaching very high temperatures. Early in the morning, the oven keeper would build a fire inside, heating the stones until they glowed. Then the coals would be raked out, and the retained heat would bake bread for hours. Families would bring their dough to the oven, often shaped into distinctive patterns so they could identify their own loaves. While waiting for bread to bake, neighbors would gather, share news, strengthen community bonds. The smell of fresh bread would fill the street, and children would wait eagerly for the warm loaves to emerge. This simple practice created social cohesion. The oven was more than a cooking device. It was a gathering place, an anchor point for neighborhood life. The Phoenicians developed techniques for preserving wood and preventing decay. They understood that wood exposed to water and air would eventually rot, a serious problem for a seafaring people whose lives depended on ship integrity. They treated wood with various substances, cedar oil, which naturally resisted insects and decay, tar and pitch, which sealed the wood and prevented water penetration, and special mixtures of wax and resins. For ship construction, they would sometimes char the surface of the wood slightly, creating a layer that resisted rot. They stored valuable timber off the ground, in dry, well-ventilated spaces. They knew which parts of a tree were most resistant to decay. Heartwood from the center lasted longer than sapwood from the outer rings. This careful stewardship of materials reflected a deeper principle: nothing should be wasted, and good craftsmanship began with proper care of resources. Let us speak now of Phoenician practices in caring for the sick and elderly. In their culture, families were responsible for their members across all stages of life. When someone fell ill, they were tended at home with herbal remedies, rest, and nourishment. Chicken broth with healing herbs, bread soaked in wine, honey mixed with soothing plants, these were the medicines of care. The elderly were respected for their wisdom and experience. Grandparents lived with their families, teaching traditional skills to the young, telling stories of the past, advising on important decisions. There was no concept of discarding those who could no longer work. Instead, their value was recognized in different ways. An old sailor might no longer go to sea, but he could teach navigation to apprentices. An elderly weaver might work more slowly, but her knowledge of complex patterns was invaluable. This intergenerational connection created continuity and stability in Phoenician society. The Phoenicians created beautiful stone carvings for their sarcophagi and memorial monuments. Using the same tools and techniques employed in building construction, they carved limestone with remarkable delicacy. Some sarcophagi were shaped like people, with carved faces showing serene expressions. Others were decorated with scenes, ships sailing toward a symbolic horizon, gardens representing paradise, processions of mourners showing respect for the deceased. The carving was done with bronze chisels and wooden mallets, each strike carefully controlled to shape the stone without shattering it. Then the surface would be smoothed with abrasive stones and sand, creating a finish that felt almost silky to the touch. These monuments weren't expressions of fear of death. Rather, they honored life and celebrated the journey of the soul. They showed belief in continuation, in the enduring nature of memory and legacy. Finally, let us reflect on the Phoenician understanding of balance in life. Their culture valued both industry and rest, both material success and spiritual connection, both individual achievement and community support. Their week included market days and rest days. Their year included times of intense work, harvesting olives, preparing ships for trading season, and times of celebration and religious observance. They understood that sailors needed time on land to restore themselves, that merchants needed time away from commerce to connect with family. This rhythm wasn't seen as limiting productivity. Rather, it was seen as sustaining it. A person who never rested would make mistakes, would lose perspective, would diminish in health and spirit. But a person who balanced effort with renewal could maintain their work across a lifetime. This wisdom guided their society, creating a culture that was both productive and sustainable, both ambitious and humane. The Phoenicians were skilled in the art of coral harvesting and working. In the shallow waters around their coastal cities, red and pink coral grew in beautiful branching formations. Divers would descend into the clear Mediterranean waters, holding their breath, to carefully cut coral from the rocks. This was delicate work. The coral was brittle and could easily break. Once brought to the surface, coral artisans would clean and polish the branches, revealing their rich colors. They carved coral into beads, amulets, and decorative inlays for jewelry and furniture. Coral was believed to have protective properties, and mothers would give coral beads to their children to wear. The deep red Mediterranean coral was particularly prized and became a valuable export. Working with coral required patience and a gentle touch. Rushing would shatter the material, but careful, deliberate work could transform these gifts from the sea into objects of lasting beauty. Now let us speak of the Phoenician practice of maintaining seed stores and plant knowledge. Farmers and gardeners saved seeds from their best plants each year, the wheat that grew strongest, the grapes that tasted sweetest, the olive trees that produced most abundantly. These seeds were stored in sealed clay jars, protected from moisture and pests, ready for the next planting season. This practice preserved varieties that were well suited to local conditions and slowly improved crops over generations. Knowledge about plants was shared freely, which herbs grew best in shade, when to prune grapevines, how to graft a productive olive branch onto a young tree. This botanical wisdom was part of everyday conversation, passed from neighbor to neighbor, from generation to generation. The Phoenicians understood they were stewards of these plants, that their care today would affect harvests for years to come. The Phoenicians created beautiful wind chimes and decorative hangings that adorned their homes and gardens. They crafted these from bronze, shells, glass, and pottery, materials that would produce pleasant sounds when stirred by the breeze. Thin bronze discs would be suspended on strings, creating gentle melodic tones. Shells collected from beaches would be polished and arranged to catch the light and make soft clicking sounds. Glass beads in many colors would hang in windows, transforming sunlight into rainbows that danced across walls. These weren't merely decorations, they made spaces more pleasant, more alive. The soft tinkling of wind chimes signaled a cooling breeze on a hot day. The play of light through colored glass brought joy to a simple room. The Phoenicians understood that beauty enriched life, that small touches of art and music could transform everyday spaces into places of peace and pleasure. Let us consider the Phoenician tradition of storytelling and oral history. In the evenings, families and friends would gather, and elders would tell stories. Some were ancient myths about gods and heroes. Others were family histories, tales of an ancestor who made a successful voyage, or a grandmother who survived a difficult winter, or a great-uncle who learned a special craft. Still others were teaching stories, using narrative to convey practical wisdom or moral lessons. Children would listen, their eyes wide, absorbing not just the stories but the rhythm of language, the art of description, the power of memory. In a largely oral culture, storytellers were living libraries, preserving knowledge and tradition in their minds and voices. The best storytellers were treasured members of the community, and their craft was respected as much as any physical skill. The Phoenicians developed sophisticated understanding of soil types and their uses. They recognized that sandy soil near the coast drained quickly and was suitable for certain plants but not others. Clay-rich soil held water longer and was better for different crops. Rocky hillside soil, though difficult to work, produced grapes with intense flavors. They observed how soil color indicated its properties: dark soil rich in organic matter, red soil containing iron, pale soil that might be too alkaline. Farmers would sometimes mix different soil types to create better growing conditions, carrying baskets of rich valley soil to improve rocky terraces. They added organic matter, decomposed plant material, animal manure, to enrich depleted fields. This intimate knowledge of earth came from working with hands in the soil, observing over seasons and years what thrived where, understanding that the foundation of all agriculture was the living soil beneath their feet. Now let us explore the Phoenician practice of creating shaded walkways and public spaces. In the intense Mediterranean sun, shade was precious. They planted trees along streets and around public squares, plane trees, terebinths, and carobs that would grow large canopies. They constructed pergolas, wooden frameworks over which grapevines would grow, creating living roofs of green leaves. In marketplaces, they erected awnings made from fabric or woven reeds, removable when storms threatened but providing crucial shade during hot days. These shaded spaces weren't just practical, they were social centers where people could gather comfortably, where children could play without sun exposure, where elders could sit and watch the flow of city life. The Phoenicians designed their cities not just for commerce but for human comfort and community interaction. The Phoenicians were skilled at making and using natural adhesives. From tree resins, they created sticky substances that could join materials together. Pine resin, heated and purified, became a strong glue for woodworking. They mixed resin with beeswax to create a waterproof sealant for ships and water containers. From animal hides and bones, they made protein-based glues by boiling and reducing the collagen-rich tissues. These glues were used in furniture making, in attaching gemstones to jewelry settings, in bookbinding when they needed to repair or create documents. They understood that different adhesives had different properties. Some stayed flexible, others dried hard, some resisted water while others dissolved in moisture. A master craftsman knew which adhesive to use for each application, and preparing good glue was considered an important part of the craft. Let us speak now of Phoenician practices in weather prediction and seasonal observation. Living close to nature, they learned to read signs that others might miss. Certain cloud formations meant rain was coming. The behavior of birds, flying low or seeking shelter, indicated changing weather. The smell of the air, the color of the sunset, the feel of the wind, all carried information. They knew that swallows arriving meant spring was truly here, that certain stars appearing at sunset marked the time to harvest olives, that the first autumn rains should come when the Pleiades rose at dawn. This knowledge wasn't superstition, it was accumulated observation, the wisdom of countless generations watching the sky and the sea. Farmers, sailors, and merchants all relied on this ability to predict weather and understand seasonal patterns. It was a form of literacy written in clouds and stars rather than in letters on papyrus. The Phoenicians created beautiful furniture that combined functionality with aesthetic appeal. They worked primarily in wood, joined with careful mortise and tenon joints, sometimes reinforced with bronze fittings. They made couches for reclining during meals, inlaid with ivory or precious woods in decorative patterns. They crafted storage chests with carved or painted scenes, where families kept their valuable textiles and possessions. They built folding stools that were both practical and elegant, portable yet sturdy. The finest furniture pieces were works of art, but even simple household furniture showed attention to proportion and finish. A well-made chair would last for generations, becoming an heirloom passed down through families. The furniture makers understood that people spent their lives surrounded by these objects, and that beauty in everyday things enriched daily existence. Finally, let us reflect on the Phoenician understanding of reciprocity and fair exchange. Their entire trading culture was built on the principle that transactions should benefit both parties. A fair price wasn't just about the value of goods, it was about building relationships that would endure. A merchant who cheated a customer might make a short-term profit but would lose long-term trading partnerships. The Phoenicians understood that their prosperity depended on networks of trust, on being known as honest and reliable. When disputes arose, they sought solutions that preserved relationships rather than declaring absolute winners and losers. This wasn't naive idealism, it was practical wisdom. In a world connected by slow ships across vast distances, reputation was everything. A merchant's word had to be as solid as the goods in his warehouse. This ethic of reciprocity and fairness made Phoenician traders welcome in ports throughout the Mediterranean and helped create the vast commercial networks that were their true empire. The Phoenicians were skilled in the creation of fishing nets and traps. They wove nets from linen thread, knotting each intersection carefully to create a mesh that was both strong and flexible. Different mesh sizes caught different fish, fine nets for sardines and anchovies, wider nets for larger fish. They weighted the bottom of nets with small stones or clay pieces and attached floats of cork or inflated bladders to the top, so the net would hang properly in the water. They also created fish traps from woven reeds and wood basket-like structures with funnel entrances that fish could swim into but couldn't easily find their way out. These were placed in shallow waters or tidal areas. Fishermen would check their traps daily, harvesting what they needed and releasing fish that were too small. This wasn't just practical, it was sustainable, ensuring that fish populations would continue to thrive and provide food for future generations. Now let us speak of the Phoenician practice of companion planting in their gardens. They observed over generations that certain plants grew better together. Grapevines thrived when beans were planted between the rows. The beans enriched the soil with nutrients that the vines needed. Garlic planted near roses seemed to keep pests away. Herbs like basil and oregano, growing among vegetables, attracted beneficial insects while deterring harmful ones. Tall plants provided shade for those that couldn't tolerate full sun. These weren't accidental discoveries. They were the result of careful observation and experimentation. A gardener would try different combinations, note what flourished and what failed, and pass this knowledge to their children. These gardens were ecosystems, where diversity created resilience and different plants supported each other's growth. The Phoenicians created beautiful incense burners that served both practical and aesthetic purposes. These were often made from bronze or stone, shaped like miniature buildings, boats, or mythical creatures. Holes or perforations allowed fragrant smoke to escape in patterns. When frankincense or myrrh was burned inside, the smoke would drift upward, carrying prayers and creating pleasant aromas. Some incense burners had compartments for different resins, allowing the burning of multiple fragrances. These objects were found in temples, but also in homes, where they sweetened the air and created moments of tranquility. The ritual of preparing the incense, lighting it, watching the smoke rise and disperse, this was a form of meditation, a pause in the busy day to breathe and center oneself. Let us consider the Phoenician tradition of maintaining communal wells and water sources. Fresh water was a precious resource, and wells were considered common property, to be maintained by the community and available to all. There were customs around well use, taking only what you needed, not contaminating the water, helping neighbors who had difficulty drawing water. The area around a well often became a social gathering place, particularly for women who came to draw water for their households. Here, news was exchanged, friendships maintained, community bonds strengthened. The well wasn't just a water source, it was a commons, a shared resource that required shared responsibility and created shared connection. This sense of collective stewardship extended to other resources as well: communal fishing grounds, shared grazing areas, public gathering spaces. The Phoenicians developed sophisticated methods for training and pruning fruit trees and vines. They understood that a grapevine left unpruned would produce many small, inferior grapes, but a properly pruned vine would yield fewer, larger, sweeter clusters. They knew which branches to cut and which to keep, how to shape a tree so that sunlight reached all the fruit, when in the season to prune for best results. Young trees were trained to grow in forms that would make harvesting easier and protect fruit from damage. Old trees were rejuvenated through careful pruning, removing dead wood and encouraging new growth. This work required knowledge passed down through generations and the patience to wait years to see the results of decisions made today. A well-tended orchard or vineyard could produce abundantly for a century or more, a living legacy from one generation to the next. Now let us explore the Phoenician understanding of fermentation beyond winemaking. They created fermented beverages from various fruits, pomegranates, dates, and figs. They made vinegar for preserving and flavoring food. They understood that fermentation required the right conditions, proper temperature, protection from contamination, patience as the process unfolded. They recognized that fermentation was a form of transformation, where invisible forces turned grape juice into wine, milk into cheese, dough into risen bread. While they didn't understand the science of yeast and bacteria, they respected the process and learned through experience how to guide it. Master fermenters could tell by smell and taste when a wine was ready, when a batch had gone wrong, what adjustments might improve the next attempt. This wisdom was practical magic, understanding how to work with natural processes to create something new and valuable. The Phoenicians created protective amulets and charms from various materials. Small carved figures of deities or protective symbols were worn on necklaces or sewn into clothing. The eye symbol, still seen throughout the Mediterranean today, was believed to ward off harmful gazes. Miniature ships or anchors served as protective talismans for sailors. These weren't mere superstition. They were expressions of hope, tangible reminders of divine protection, objects that provided psychological comfort in an uncertain world. A mother giving her child an amulet was expressing her love and her wish for their safety. A sailor carrying a protective charm was acknowledging both the dangers of the sea and his faith that he would return home. These small objects connected the physical and spiritual worlds, the practical and the hopeful. Let us speak now of Phoenician practices in food storage and cellars. They dug storage rooms beneath their houses or carved them into hillsides, where the earth's natural coolness kept food fresh longer. Grain was stored in large ceramic vessels called pithoi, sealed to keep out moisture and pests. Wine and olive oil aged in underground chambers where temperature remained constant. Dried fish, cured meats, and preserved fruits hung from ceiling beams. Some foods were stored in honey, which naturally prevented spoilage. Others were kept in olive oil or brine. The arrangement of a storage cellar reflected accumulated wisdom about preservation, which foods could be stored together, which needed separation, how to rotate stock so that older items were used first. A well-managed cellar ensured that a family could eat well even in winter or during times when fresh food was scarce. The Phoenicians understood the importance of rest and sleep. Their beds were often made with woven rope or leather straps stretched across wooden frames, providing a flexible, comfortable surface. Mattresses were stuffed with wool, plant fibers, or feathers, materials that breathed and could be refreshed. Linen sheets, cool in summer, were layered with wool blankets for winter warmth. They recognized that good sleep was essential for health, for clear thinking, for the strength to work the next day. Homes were designed with sleeping areas that were quiet and dark. The rhythm of their days followed natural light, rising with the sun, winding down as darkness fell. This alignment with natural cycles supported healthy rest. They understood that sleep wasn't wasted time. It was essential restoration, as important as food and water for maintaining life and vitality. Finally, let us reflect on the Phoenician appreciation for simplicity and sufficiency. While they created luxury goods for trade and enjoyed beauty in their lives, there was also a cultural value placed on having enough rather than always seeking more. A craftsman took pride in work well done, not just in accumulating wealth. A merchant measured success not only in profits but in relationships maintained and reputation built. Families found contentment in gathering together, sharing meals, enjoying music and stories. This wasn't about poverty or deprivation. It was about recognizing that satisfaction comes from quality rather than quantity, from relationships rather than possessions, from meaningful work rather than endless accumulation. This perspective created a culture that was both prosperous and grounded, both ambitious and content, both reaching outward to explore the world and returning home to appreciate what they had. The Phoenicians were skilled in the art of shell collecting and the creation of objects from marine treasures. The beaches and shallow waters of their coastline offered an abundance of shells, spiraled conches, smooth cowries, delicate scallops, and iridescent abalone. Children would gather shells, learning to identify different types, understanding which were rare and which were common. Artisans transformed these shells into useful and beautiful objects. They carved shell into buttons, beads, and small spoons for cosmetics. The inner surface of certain shells, with its luminous mother of pearl, was cut into tiny pieces and inlaid into wooden boxes and furniture, creating shimmering mosaics. Large conch shells, when the tip was removed, could be blown like horns, producing deep, resonant sounds used to signal ships or call people to gatherings. Every shell was a gift from the sea, and the Phoenicians honored these gifts by transforming them into objects of lasting value. Now let us speak of the Phoenician practice of seasonal celebrations and festivals. Throughout the year, they marked important transitions with communal gatherings. The spring festival celebrated renewal and planting, with offerings to ensure good harvests. The autumn festival gave thanks for the grape harvest and the olive crop, with feasting and music. Religious observances were interwoven with agricultural cycles. The gods who controlled rain and sun were honored at times when their blessings were most needed. These weren't solemn, somber occasions. They were times of joy, when work paused and communities came together. There would be shared meals, where everyone contributed food. Musicians would play, and people would dance. Stories would be told, marriages celebrated, children blessed. These festivals renewed community bonds, reminded people of their shared dependence on the land and sea, and created moments of collective joy that sustained them through the hard work of daily life. The Phoenicians created beautiful mirror surfaces using polished bronze and silver. Craftsmen would cast a flat disc of bronze, then spend hours polishing it with increasingly fine abrasives until the surface became reflective. The best mirrors were backed with handles or stands, often decorated with carved designs. Though the reflection wasn't as clear as modern glass mirrors, it was sufficient to see one's face, to arrange one's hair, to apply cosmetics. These mirrors were valued possessions, signs of wealth and refinement. But they were also practical tools, particularly for women preparing for special occasions. The process of creating a mirror was meditative. The repetitive polishing, the gradual emergence of reflection, the transformation of dull metal into a surface that could capture light and image. It was a reminder that beauty often required patience and persistent effort. Let us consider the Phoenician understanding of composting and soil enrichment. They recognized that organic waste, kitchen scraps, plant trimmings, animal manure, could be transformed into valuable fertilizer. They created compost piles in corners of gardens or courtyards, layering different materials and allowing them to decompose. Over months, this mixture would break down into dark, rich compost that could be mixed into soil to improve its fertility. This wasn't just practical waste management, it was a complete cycle, returning to the earth what came from it, ensuring that nutrients weren't lost but recirculated. Farmers would spread compost on fields before planting, gardeners would enrich their vegetable plots, and even potted plants would benefit from this enriched soil. The Phoenicians understood that healthy soil was the foundation of abundant harvests, and that caring for the soil was caring for future generations. The Phoenicians were adept at creating natural pest management strategies. They observed which plants repelled certain insects and which attracted beneficial predators. They planted strong-smelling herbs around their crops to confuse pests seeking food plants. They encouraged birds to nest near their gardens and orchards, knowing these birds would consume vast numbers of insects. They used wood ash sprinkled on plants to deter certain pests. They hand-picked larger insects when infestations were small, preventing populations from exploding. They rotated crops, knowing that some pests were specific to particular plants and would decline if their food source moved. This approach required knowledge, observation, and intervention at the right moments. but it meant they could protect their crops without poisons that might harm people or beneficial creatures. It was agriculture in partnership with nature rather than warfare against it. Now let us explore the Phoenician tradition of mentorship and apprenticeship. When a young person showed aptitude for a particular craft, pottery, metalwork, sailing, weaving, they might be apprenticed to a master of that craft. This wasn't just about learning techniques, it was about absorbing a way of thinking, a standard of excellence, an ethical approach to work. The apprentice would start with simple tasks, preparing materials, cleaning tools, observing the master at work. Gradually, they would be given more responsibility, always under watchful guidance. The master would correct mistakes, explain principles, share hard-won insights. This relationship could last years, and often became like a second family connection. When the apprentice finally became skilled enough to work independently, there would be recognition of this achievement. Sometimes a special piece created to demonstrate mastery, sometimes a ceremony marking the transition. This system ensured that knowledge wasn't lost, that quality standards were maintained, and that each generation could stand on the shoulders of those who came before. The Phoenicians created soothing herbal teas and infusions for comfort and health. They steeped mint leaves in hot water for refreshing drinks that aided digestion. Chamomile flowers made a gentle tea that helped with sleep and calmed nerves. Sage infusions were believed to strengthen memory and promote longevity. Lemon balm created a pleasant drink that lifted spirits. These weren't considered medicine in the way we think of it, they were part of daily life, ways to care for oneself and one's family. The ritual of preparing tea, heating the water, adding the herbs, waiting as the flavors infused, sipping slowly, this itself was therapeutic, a moment of pause and self-care in a busy day. Knowledge of herbs was shared among neighbors and passed from mothers to daughters, creating a rich tradition of plant-based wellness that worked alongside but separately from treatments for serious illness. Let us speak now of Phoenician practices in candle and lamp oil production. While olive oil was their primary fuel for lamps, they also rendered fat from animals to create tallow for candles. The fat would be heated and purified, then poured into molds with wicks of twisted fiber positioned in the center. These candles provided portable light and were used when people needed to move through dark spaces or work after sunset in areas where lamps were impractical. The production of lamp oil from olives was an important seasonal task. After pressing olives for the finest eating oil, subsequent pressings produced oil of lesser quality, perfect for lamps. This oil would be stored in large vessels, and families would refill their small lamps as needed. The soft, warm light of oil lamps, steady and quiet, created intimate atmospheres in homes, allowing life to continue even after the sun set. The Phoenicians understood the value of oral agreements and personal honor. In a culture where literacy was growing but still not universal, much business was conducted through spoken agreements. A merchant's word was their bond. To break an agreement was to destroy one's reputation and future prospects. Witnesses would be present for important transactions, their memory serving as verification if disputes arose later. But disputes were relatively rare, because the social cost of dishonesty was so high. In small communities and interconnected trading networks, everyone's reputation was known. This created a strong incentive for honesty and fair dealing. Trust was the invisible infrastructure that allowed commerce to flow smoothly, ships to sail with valuable cargo, and partnerships to span generations and great distances. Finally, let us reflect on the Phoenician relationship with the horizon. Living on the edge of land and sea, they were constantly aware of the horizon, that distant line where sky and water met. For sailors, The horizon held both promise and mystery. Beyond it lay new lands, trading opportunities, adventures, and home ports they were sailing toward or away from. The horizon was never fixed. It moved as you moved, always the same distance away, always beckoning. This created a particular mindset, an openness to possibility, a comfort with journeys that had distant goals, a patience with processes that unfolded slowly over time and distance. The Phoenicians didn't seek to conquer the horizon. They understood it as a constant companion, a reminder that there was always more to discover, more connections to make, more understanding to gain. This perspective shaped their entire civilization, outward-looking yet grounded, curious yet patient, ambitious yet respectful of the vast world around them. The Phoenicians were skilled in the art of creating natural fragrances and perfumed oils for personal care. They understood that flowers released their strongest scents at different times, jasmine in the evening, roses in early morning. They would gather petals at the optimal time and steep them in pure olive oil, allowing the fragrance to infuse over days or weeks. Sometimes they would layer fresh petals repeatedly, gradually strengthening the scent. They created perfumes from citrus blossoms, from lavender, from aromatic resins dissolved in oil. These weren't just luxuries, they were part of personal hygiene and self-care. In a time before daily bathing was common, perfumed oils helped people feel fresh and pleasant. They were also used in massage, the combination of touch and fragrance creating moments of relaxation and care. A small vial of perfumed oil was a precious gift, carrying not just pleasant scent but the time and knowledge required to create it. Now let us speak of the Phoenician practice of creating play spaces for children. While children were expected to help with family work as they grew older, they also had time for play and exploration. Communities created areas where children could gather safely, perhaps a shaded courtyard, a beach area supervised by adults, a grove of trees on the edge of town. Simple toys were crafted, wooden boats to float in fountains, clay animals to play with, balls made from leather or wound fabric. Older children might have spinning tops, knucklebones for games of chance, or miniature versions of adult tools for imaginative play. This wasn't neglecting children or leaving them unsupervised. It was recognizing that play was how children learned, how they developed skills, how they formed friendships and understood social dynamics. A child playing at being a sailor or merchant was beginning to understand adult roles. Children playing together were learning cooperation, negotiation, and empathy. The Phoenicians developed sophisticated understanding of wood joinery, creating connections between pieces without nails or excessive adhesive. They cut mortise and tenon joints, where one piece had a projecting tongue that fit precisely into a cavity cut in another piece. They created dovetail joints, where interlocking wedge shapes held pieces together with remarkable strength. They used wooden pegs driven through drilled holes to secure joints. These techniques required precise measurement, careful cutting, and deep understanding of how wood behaved, how it expanded and contracted with moisture changes, how grain direction affected strength, which joints were appropriate for which stresses. A well-made piece of furniture held together by skilled joinery could last for generations, the joints actually becoming tighter and stronger over time as the wood settled. Let us consider the Phoenician tradition of creating covered marketplaces for protection from weather. In their cities, they built covered areas where merchants could display goods protected from sun and rain. These structures had roofs supported by columns, creating shaded arcades. The design allowed air to flow through, keeping the space cooler than fully enclosed buildings. During rain, commerce could continue uninterrupted. These covered markets became important social spaces, places where people gathered not just to buy and sell, but to meet friends, exchange news, see what was new and interesting. The architecture itself facilitated community. The columns created semi-private spaces where small groups could gather, while the open design meant you could see and be seen, maintaining the sense of public connection. This thoughtful design showed understanding that commerce was as much about social interaction as about the exchange of goods. The Phoenicians were adept at creating durable floor surfaces for their homes and public buildings. In wealthier buildings, they laid floors of cut stone, limestone squares fitted together tightly. These floors were cool in summer heat and could be swept clean easily. In more modest homes, they created floors from packed earth mixed with lime, creating a hard surface that resisted wear. Some floors were covered with mosaics, tiny pieces of stone creating patterns or images. They understood drainage, sloping floors slightly so water would run toward drains rather than pooling. In workshops where liquids were common, winemaking facilities, dye works, they created especially durable floors that could withstand moisture and chemicals. The floor was the foundation of daily life, the surface walked on countless times, where children played, where work happened. Making it well was an investment in comfort and longevity. Now let us explore the Phoenician understanding of fire management and hearth care. The hearth was the heart of the home, where food was cooked, where warmth radiated on cool evenings, where families gathered. Keeping the fire going was an important responsibility, usually managed by women of the household. They understood which woods burned hot for cooking, which created long-lasting coals, which produced aromatic smoke for flavoring food. They knew how to bank a fire at night, covering it with ash so it would smolder slowly until morning, when it could be revived with fresh fuel. They cleaned the hearth regularly, removing old ash to use in gardens and workshops. Fire was both servant and potential danger. They respected its power, contained it carefully, and used it skillfully. The ability to control fire was fundamental to civilization, and the Phoenicians understood this deeply. The Phoenicians created beautiful hair ornaments and combs from various materials. Bone and wood were carved into decorative combs, their teeth carefully shaped to glide through hair without breaking it. Wealthy women wore hairpins of bronze, silver, or gold, topped with decorative elements, small flowers, birds, or geometric designs. They created nets woven from fine thread or even gold wire to hold elaborate hairstyles in place. Hair was considered a form of beauty to be cultivated and displayed. Women would style each other's hair, especially before festivals or special occasions. This wasn't vanity, it was an art form, a way of honoring important events, a form of self-expression. The time spent arranging hair was also social time, when women talked, shared news, strengthened bonds. These simple objects, combs, pins, nets, were tools that facilitated both beauty and connection. Let us speak now of Phoenician practices in maintaining tools and equipment. A craftsman understood that tools were precious possessions that required care. Metal tools were cleaned after use, oiled to prevent rust, sharpened regularly to maintain their edge. Wooden handles were sanded smooth to prevent splinters, occasionally oiled to prevent cracking. Tools were stored carefully, hung on walls, or placed in designated spots where they wouldn't be damaged. A well-maintained saw would cut smoothly for decades. A properly cared for chisel would hold its edge through countless projects. This care extended to all equipment. Ships were maintained continuously, looms were kept clean and properly tensioned, pottery wheels were kept level and smooth. The time spent on maintenance wasn't wasted, it prevented larger problems, extended the life of valuable items, and reflected respect for the craft and the tools that made it possible. The Phoenicians understood the importance of shade trees and thoughtful landscaping. They planted trees not just for fruit or timber, but for the comfort they provided. A large tree near a home could cool the entire building, its shade reducing interior temperatures significantly. Trees planted along streets created pleasant walking paths, protected from harsh sun. In public squares, groves of trees provided gathering places where people could sit comfortably even in summer heat. They chose trees carefully, some for quick growth to provide shade sooner, others for longevity that would serve future generations, some for beautiful flowers or pleasant fragrance. Planting a tree was an act of hope and generosity. The planter might enjoy its shade, but the full benefit would come to those who followed. This long-term thinking reflected a culture that valued continuity and cared about the world they would leave to their children's children. Finally, let us reflect on the Phoenician appreciation for quiet moments and contemplation. Despite living in busy port cities filled with commerce and activity, they valued times of stillness. A person might sit by the harbor in the evening, watching the sun set over the water, simply being present with the beauty of the moment. A gardener might pause in their work to appreciate the first bloom on a plant they had tended. A craftsman might step back from a nearly finished piece to consider it quietly before adding final touches. These weren't wasted moments. They were essential pauses, opportunities to reconnect with purpose, to appreciate the fruits of labor, to find meaning beyond constant activity. The Phoenicians understood that a good life wasn't just about productivity. It was about awareness, appreciation, and the wisdom to know when to act and when to simply be. And so, as our journey through the Phoenician world draws to a close, let us take a few more moments to reflect, to allow all we have discovered to settle gently, like evening descending peacefully over the Mediterranean. We have traveled far together, across 3,000 years and countless miles of sea. We have walked through their cities, felt the smooth stone beneath our feet, smelled the cedar and the salt air, heard the gentle sounds of bronze chimes and distant waves. We have watched craftsmen at their work, patient hands shaping clay, polishing metal, weaving thread into cloth. We have seen families gathering in the evening, sharing bread and stories, connecting across generations. The Phoenicians have shown us that there are many ways to leave a mark on history. They did not build vast monuments to proclaim their power. They did not write their story in the language of conquest. Instead, they wrote it in connections made, in trade routes that became bridges between cultures, in skills shared and knowledge passed forward, in the simple alphabet that democratized writing and changed human civilization forever. They understood something we sometimes forget in our hurried modern world. They knew that true wealth is not merely accumulated, it is created through fair exchange and mutual benefit. They knew that beauty is not a luxury but a necessity, that the time spent creating something well-made, something lovely, is time invested in human dignity and joy. They knew that patience is not weakness but wisdom, that some things cannot be rushed, that a tree grows slowly, a skill takes years to master, a relationship develops through countless small interactions over time. Think of the Phoenician merchant preparing for a voyage across unknown waters. He checks his ship carefully, every rope, every sail, every seal. He loads his cargo, amphors of wine, bundles of purple cloth, cedar planks, glass beads that catch the light. He says goodbye to his family, not knowing exactly when he will return, trusting in his skills and his gods. He sails beyond the horizon, that distant line where sky meets sea, into uncertainty. And in that journey he carries not just goods, but ideas, stories from one port to share in another, techniques witnessed in one place to introduce somewhere new, creating invisible threads that connect distant peoples. Think of the craftsman in their workshop, the potter at the wheel, feeling the clay respond to gentle pressure, the weaver at the loom, passing the shuttle through in an ancient rhythm, the metalsmith heating bronze, knowing just when to pour, when to hammer, when to let the metal rest. Each one a master of their craft, but also a student, always learning, always refining, always striving for that perfect piece where skill and vision align. Their work was not mere production. It was a form of meditation, of prayer, of contribution to beauty in the world. Think of the grandmother teaching a child, showing how to identify herbs, how to braid a basket, how to read the stars. This quiet transmission of knowledge, repeated in countless homes across countless generations, was the true strength of Phoenician civilization. It wasn't written in scrolls or carved in stone. It lived in memory and muscle, in stories told and skills demonstrated, in the invisible but unbreakable chain linking past to future. The Phoenicians created a civilization that was resilient precisely because it was flexible, networked rather than rigidly hierarchical, built on relationships rather than force, sustained by mutual benefit rather than extraction. When empires around them crumbled, the Phoenician network adapted and endured. When others built walls, they built bridges. When others sought to dominate, they sought to connect. And now, 3,000 years later, we can still feel their presence in the letters of the alphabet that descended from their innovation, in the purple that still signifies royalty and luxury, in the very idea that different peoples can meet peacefully to exchange goods and ideas, in the understanding that the sea is not a barrier but a highway, that the horizon is not an ending but an invitation. As you rest now, let these images drift through your mind like clouds across a summer sky. Ships with sails catching the wind, peaceful and purposeful. Craftsmen's hands creating beauty from raw materials, patient and skilled. Gardens where plants grow in harmony, each supporting the others. Communities gathering to celebrate harvests and mark seasons, connected and joyful. The gentle rhythm of waves against stone harbors, eternal and calming. The Phoenicians remind us that a meaningful life is built from many small acts of care and craft. A pot well made, a garden tended, a child taught, a bargain fairly struck, a ship safely guided home, a story told, a song sung, a moment of beauty noticed and appreciated. These are not small things. They are the substance of civilization, the foundation of human flourishing. In our own time, we too can choose connection over isolation, craft over carelessness, patience over haste, sufficiency over endless accumulation. We too can honor the wisdom of those who came before while creating beauty and meaning for those who will come after. We too can understand that we are part of long chains of knowledge and care, receiving gifts from the past and passing them forward to the future. So rest now, peacefully, knowing that the story of human wisdom and creativity continues. The Phoenicians played their part, adding their unique melody to the great symphony of civilization. And now we play ours, each contributing what we can, each creating connections, each, in our own way, sailing toward new horizons while honoring the wisdom of ancient navigators. Let the gentle rhythm of their world lull you into peaceful sleep. The waves against the harbor, the shuttle through the loom, the turning of the potter's wheel, the breathing of the sea. All is well. All is calm. The ships have found their harbor. The work is complete. Rest now. May you sleep deeply, and may your dreams be filled with the wisdom of the ancients, the beauty of well-made things, the peace of fair exchange, and the endless possibility of new horizons. Good night, and farewell to the Phoenicians, those quiet masters of connection, whose gentle legacy still echoes across the waters of time.